Welcome to the Communicating Earth podcast by Climate Acceptance Studios, the podcast by and for climate and nature communicators. If you work in communications at a company or organization dedicated to addressing climate, nature, and environmental issues, or if you want to understand the latest research and examples of how best to communicate these complex problems, this podcast is for you. I'm Nathaniel Walters, and my usual job is head of content, but today I've got the pleasure of hosting our podcast to speak with Emilie McGlone, Director of Peaceboat US. And my first question for you is, would you describe yourself as an activist, campaigner, advocate, environmentalist, or something else?
Well, thank you so much for hosting, first of all, on this incredible podcast. And I would say I would identify as a couple of those, maybe campaigner and also environmentalist. I've been working with our organization, Peaceboat, which is an international NGO working also to create a culture of peace and sustainability through education since 2004. So we advocate for many campaigns around environmental sustainability, ocean conservation, and climate action. And I'm also an environmentalist myself in my daily life.
Very good. And why would you define yourself that way? Why did you choose, it was campaigner and environmentalist, wasn't it?
Yes, I think being an environmentalist, I really like to think about living in harmony with nature through connection with our environment around us, of course, connecting also with sustainability practices, living in a way that really promotes connection to our sustainable development goals. And then also as a campaigner, working to advocate for those goals with Peaceboat, raising awareness through educational programs. We've created so many different programs around the world. Peaceboat is visiting around 20 countries every 3 months. And in every country that we visit, they're facing different challenges. So learning about the local realities from guest speakers, taking up the campaigns together with our partners and advocating in a unified way can help to make really positive change for our environment.
I mean, I hear about these wonderful initiatives and I get to meet such exciting people such as yourself. And it always surprises me that we don't know more about this in the public and that more action isn't being taken. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's always so many reasons. It's a huge planet that we live on with so many countries and advocates around the world. And with the power of the internet and the power of connectivity, we're learning about so many different causes, but there's still so much more to explore. As we know, the ocean covers more than 70% of our planet, and it's very vast. Peaceboat was started in Japan in 1983. So it was started by young university students who are advocating for social justice, human rights, and equality, and friendship building across borders. So from those Japanese university students who started Peaceboat all the way till now, our ship carries around 2,000 people on board every 3 months and travels to 100 countries per year. So there's a grand scale of over 44, 45 years, let's say, of action that's been taking place over this time period. But still, there's so many more people that we can reach. So, working through social media, advocacy campaigns, press conferences, we're always trying to raise our voice and to encourage more people, not only to join us on board, but to be part of the movement for climate action.
You kind of just covered this entire podcast in one answer, but I'm going to try and break it down a little bit more because there's so much there to unpack. I mean, this podcast and our company is based on the theory that action inspires action, which it sounds like is exactly what you're doing. But have you got a specific story of action that you've directly worked on recently that we can use as kind of an example to talk about your strategies and what you achieved?
Sure. Well, Peaceboat, as I mentioned, is visiting so many countries every year. So we have a northbound voyage that goes all the way to the northern hemisphere up into the Arctic. And once a year, we have a southbound voyage that goes down to Patagonia. And next year, we'll also visit Antarctica. So every year in Patagonia for the past 17 years, I've been coordinating a program to raise awareness on the conservation of Patagonia pristine ecosystems, including the glaciers. And this year happens to be the International Year of Glaciers Preservation by UNESCO, started in 2025 and continues on to March of 2026. So
Mhm.
picking up the campaigns of the United Nations, Peaceboat is carrying the flag already as a campaigner for the SDG Action Campaign, raising awareness for the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And within that framework of the United Nations and supporting UNESCO, we've also been carrying this banner for the International Year of Glaciers Preservation. As we are traveling to Patagonia, we've been also inviting young leaders to come on board with us and be part of the programs. And then this past year, really, the BBNJ Treaty of the United Nations for Ocean Conservation also started to pick up more momentum and came into fruition this year on January 17th. So, as Peaceboat was traveling the Southern Hemisphere, we actually went from the island of Rapa Nui, known as Easter
Ah,
Island. Have
I've
you
been
been
there.
or have you heard of it?
I have to. I've been there. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. There's so much history and culture and also environmental issues that were being faced by the island that have
Mm.
now come to light. And there's so much development as far as social programs and educational programs and environmental awareness. So, as our ship was sailing from Easter Island over to Peru and then down to Patagonia, we celebrated the United Nations BBNJ Treaty, which is a treaty to protect the marine biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, so BBNJ. And that treaty encourages all countries and nation states to come together and support the conservation of the high seas, the areas between countries' jurisdiction. And as Peaceboat is a vessel sailing on the high seas, we thought it would be very appropriate to support the BBNJ Treaty with a huge event on board the ship as we sailed from Easter Island to Peru. That was on January 17th. We also had a young leader named Stephanie Torres, who's from Peru, part of
Right.
the organization called Sustainable Ocean Alliance. And they are the largest group of young leaders working on ocean conservation, a partner with Peaceboat. So she was in charge of this BBNJ agreement event on board the ship. She gave a lecture to more than 400 people on board, and then we had a large celebration to bring light to this BBNJ treaty. And just as we were traveling to Chile, the port of Valparaiso, which is also the oldest port in Latin America, very important for maritime shipping and communications and travel, that port is also right now applying to be the secretariat, the headquarters of the BBNJ Treaty. So we
Mm.
decided let's use the ship as a vessel, as a messenger, bringing the voice of young people and leaders from around the world and civil society and NGOs to support this incredible United Nations treaty. So we hosted a event on board the ship, an event called the Blue Innovation Reception, and this was to support the BBNJ treaty in Valparaiso. So that was kind of our method of bringing together these different themes. And then as the Peaceboat was sailing to Patagonia, we also hosted an event for the International Year of Glaciers Preservation in Antarctica in Patagonia, which is known as the Chilean Antarctica. So that was kind of our recent program that just took place last month in January of 2026.
Oh, I'm so jealous. That sounds so cool. I'm curious what the stakes were. I mean, why were you doing this work? What were you hoping to achieve or prevent? And it's fun. You know, it's I think Rapa Nui is quite an interesting cautionary tale because isn't it wasn't it basically abandoned? It basically died out because of poor environmental management.
Yes, at one time they had deforested so many of the trees that they had to really recover for so many years. And now there's an incredible government working together with NGOs and communities to preserve the culture and the nature and also the language as well. And Peaceboat is always inviting guest speakers to come on board. So as we're traveling between ports, we have speakers from each country or each region come on board and give lectures and workshops about these important issues. And we just had a guest speaker from Rapa Nui who joined us on the ship from
Mm.
Japan, sailing to Hawaii all the way to Easter Island. She disembarked the ship there in Rapa Nui, and then we had our guests from Peru to come on board. So why we're advocating for these topics is because of the importance based on what our local communities are asking us to support. So when we have the guests from Rapa Nui on board, they're sharing their culture and education with us about the different environmental challenges they might be facing or education through the arts. Then our youth leaders coming on board and they want to raise awareness also about these important topics. And we follow the United Nations call to action. So Peaceboat is an international organization that has special consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. So as civil society, we're working together with our UN partners to elevate UN campaigns and advocacy tools. So calling for the BBNJ to come into fruition, supporting its actual date when it enters into force in January 17th is something that we can do to support the treaty, to encourage other nations to also sign on to that treaty, and to strengthen the civil society participation for such an important moment.
What does that treaty signify, though? I mean, what do we stand to lose if it wasn't ratified properly?
Well, I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of different challenges. It could be overfishing in the high seas. There's so many ships sailing, and we know this because we are also sailing the high seas. And oftentimes you don't see any other ships around. But when you do sometimes see ships that are in international waters, they could be without regulations. So it could be overfishing, sometimes not respecting maritime laws. And there's so many other issues. Also, how to use the biodiversity sustainably and for research that improves the lives of all people and not just specific communities that are taking advantage of those resources. Really, the high seas is for everyone. It's the area that should be protected and for all of humanity. So by bringing together countries, it's also supporting multilateralism and collaboration amongst nations, which is very fragile today, as we know, in the current climate and political situation that we're facing. We need to bring countries together to recognize that the planet and the resources that we depend on are for everyone's benefit. And that is why the BBNJ is so important, I think.
And what's your main strategy? It sounds like it's mostly based around raising awareness locally, or
Yeah, awareness locally and also internationally. As an international vessel, we are carrying this message to every country that we visit along the route. We are also having guest speakers around so many different topics, not only ocean conservation, but human rights, social justice, looking at the impact of gender equality. We had also a women's group, for example, coming on board in Punta Arenas to talk about women in maritime. How does this system, also around the BBNJ and conservation of the ocean, become more inclusive, to include the voices of youth leaders, to include the voices of women? As we know, the maritime industry itself is a very masculine industry, and shipping and maritime for a long time has been going through a transition. So also promoting that inclusive take for the BBNJ Treaty. But our strategy is not only to be inclusive and to be sustainable and to be educational. Our purpose as an organization really is peace, education, and sustainable development. However, we also have to be strategic with when and how we call for these. So, when we were thinking about the BBNJ Treaty, we have to be strategic, let's say, in our media outreach. And I know today we're talking a lot about media and communications and tools that media strategists can use to help communicate better. So, one thing is, first of all, to always pick up on the campaigns of the United Nations as a partner. So, using the language, following the BBNJ Treaty language or any treaty or international agreements language that's found on the UN website. And reiterating that language and supporting those campaigns. Also calling press conferences and international press to get involved ahead of the ship's arrival. So I did a series of interviews with different press and media around the maritime industry, but also press that was interested not only in Peace Boat's arrival as a ship carrying the message for sustainability, but also in the BBNJ Treaty and the idea that the BBNJ Treaty could have its headquarters in Valparaiso, Chile. So those couple of topics together really did bring a lot of media attention, and we were featured on the front page of a lot of different news articles, newspapers, media, and had a few media joining the ship on the day of its arrival.
what are the biggest challenges that you face? I mean, is it difficult to maintain funding along with all the strategic work that you're trying to do?
Absolutely. Funding is always a challenge. I think awareness raising comes with the challenge of funding and of time. So I think as an international NGO, we're always faced with a need to fundraise for consistency for programs and education. However, Peaceboat also has a social business model, which has allowed us to be independent over the years. So when we started in 1983, it started, as I said, with university students in Japan coming together, chartering a ship, and bringing other students on board and guest speakers as university professors. All of the students chipped in for this to be possible and became a collaboration where everyone contributed towards the voyage. And Peaceboat has maintained this model until today. So people do contribute towards the voyage. They pay their ticket, let's say, to travel on board to visit 20 countries in 3 months around the world voyage. So they start in Japan and finish in Japan. And that funding has helped to run our international programs as an NGO and a social business. So we have Japan Grace, which is our travel company that we work with in Japan, and Peaceboat, the international NGO, and Peaceboat US, which is based in New York City. I'm based in the United Nations Plaza, and we work as a UN liaison office, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit. So there are various ways that we can bring in funding, but the main purpose of the ship and the fundraising mechanism that we have is to be self-sustainable and run the ship in a way that allows us to advocate for these important issues all throughout the voyage every year, 3 times a year.
So I don't want you to say yet exactly how you overcame the specific challenges that you had, but I'm very curious to hear more on that leg between Rapa Nui and mainland Chile when you were trying to get that off the ground, when you were trying to maximize the potential awareness through whatever communication channels you use. What were the biggest obstacles that you were facing?
I think there's always a lot of obstacles. In January, in particular, is the beginning of the year. So things tend to be a bit slower around the world. January and February in South America is also the months of vacation time. So while we were doing our outreach, a lot of people were on vacation. It could be including government representatives or partners that we normally rely on to help with outreach and communications. So I think the timing of the year is always challenging. Starting let's say we start on January 5th to send out save the dates. People are still coming back from New Year's holidays and still kind of coming back into their workflow for the new year. So I think that's always a challenge. And we tend to travel to South America during those months every year because of course, weather patterns and our climate and respecting the environment that we sail on the open ocean. And those times in South America can be very cold during the other parts of the year. So that's always a challenge. Also, there's always a lot of news happening. This year in Chile, in particular, there's a change of government happening with the current
Mhm.
administration, which will be taking place next month. Actually, officially, really handing over the full government to the new president. And so, with that change of government, normally we do have a lot of government representatives that we invite on board. This year, for example, we had the Ministry of Environment. We had the Minister Maisa Rojas, who came and spoke at our Blue Innovation reception after the event, but she was also called to meetings at the Congress on the same day. So there was a lot of changes and meetings that had to take place during this month. And then for the press as well, there's always a lot happening around politics and then other environmental issues. So seeing how the BBNJ treaty can really be the purpose of those press interviews, I think that was the big attraction for Valparaiso, is that a lot of press are very interested in BBNJ treaty headquarters taking place there.
Yeah.
And so they would pick up on the themes. And then using our ship as a vessel, that's kind of the tool that we hope to use as an advocacy tool, at least to raise awareness and help our local partners to bring these issues to light. So just timing when the ship is arriving, I guess
Right.
another challenge that's logistical for press to come on board is that they have to confirm ahead of time. So that's always a challenge with the press. Press often show up on the day or might confirm if we're lucky the day before. But with an international vessel the size of ours traveling the world, we do have a registration process. So for these events, for press to come
Mm.
on board, we had to register them at least 10 days before. And so that's always a challenge, is getting in touch with the press, confirming their schedules to see if they can send not only an interviewer, but also maybe a cameraman, or if they have a film crew, to make sure that we get everyone registered, that they can go together to the ship. So there's a lot of logistics involved in organizing these kind of campaigns.
A lot of very unique logistics, it sounds like. I mean, I'm also
Yeah,
really curious to hear kind of what channels you use, who you decide to approach, how you deal with the language issues, which audiences you target. But I'll save that for after the very exciting quick fire round, which is the next thing up. Are you ready?
sure. Yes,
Okay, so
let's
this is
go.
this is officially the halfway point. And the first question is, what's the first word that comes to mind when I say climate?
I would say action.
Who is your greatest inspiration in climate and nature communications?
I would say Dr. Sylvia Earle. She's always putting nature first
Ooh,
in her advocacy.
that's a good one. Uh, who is someone's work that you think should receive more attention?
I'm really focused right now on supporting female artists and creators. So I would say Zandi, she's from South Africa, and she was the first Black female freediving instructor. So Zandi the Black Mermaid.
I'm sensing a water theme. Favorite book, movie, or TV show on environmentalism, climate, or nature?
I would go more for the online Our Oceans on Netflix. Has a lot of great tips about the ocean and really shows incredible footage from all around the world.
Favorite communications channel?
I would say, actually, I don't know, it's a news channel, but also following it on Instagram. Democracy Now! Has great communications about world politics and current state of affairs.
And what do you think is the most effective communications channel?
It's a hard one these days. I feel like everyone's a little bit overwhelmed with media, but I would say Instagram right now is reaching more followers for the youth populations as well as adults, and especially the environmental movement.
That's a new one, but mine too, actually. What's your favorite stat or fact?
I would say one stat that we often tend to quote is that every second breath you take comes from the ocean. So we say that more than half the world's oxygen is produced by marine organisms, and these create oxygen in the ocean. And really, we believe that that helps create oxygen for the atmosphere. So every second breath you take comes from the ocean.
And is there one climate myth or misconception that you'd like to retire?
That climate change is happening anyway, and it's natural. So why do anything about it?
What is your number one source for climate information?
Also a hard one sometimes to take in all the information, but I try to follow the United Nations Climate Change Framework Convention, UNFCCC,
Mm.
and try to gain as much as I can from our COP conferences and partners on that level of climate justice advocacy, as well as climate information that is correct and accurate.
And finally, do you have a go-to analogy or metaphor for explaining the climate crisis?
I often do a workshop on the Peace Boat where we talk about Earth being like a spaceship so that we are all connected in one ship, and that, if some of us have resources on this side of the ship, we should be sharing with resources with the other side, and that the environment is one inside the ship. So I like to use the Earth ship example.
Hmm. That's the end of the quickfire round. But is there anything else that you'd like to talk about in more detail from any of those questions?
I guess I would go with the first one, maybe a little bit more about climate action. I
Hmm.
think, when people say climate, a lot of negative connotations could come to mind as well about, the impacts of climate change and how the climate is deteriorating. But I like to take a positive turn on it a little bit more and say climate action, because I feel like that helps to empower, especially civil society and also youth leaders and government as well, that they should be taking action no matter what. So even though we have all these dialogues, like I mentioned, going to the UNFCCC conference, COP, Conference of Parties, or meetings around the United Nations, and those are very important to get information, to make networks, but we also need action. So without action, it just becomes more discussion. So I would say for climate action, that's the word that I would like to take into this next 10 years.
Very good. To go back to what we were talking about before, you were talking about the difficulties specifically with logistics. How did you overcome these problems? How do you manage to achieve what you do on something like that journey from Rapa Nui to Chile?
Well, at the time, I was working in Chile, so I arrived ahead of time. That's also important. I think
Right.
having a team to work on logistics is very key. So while my colleagues were traveling on the ship, coming from Rapa Nui over to Valparaiso, I was in Chile organizing with different media contacts on the ground. Also great to be able to take phone calls, do Zoom interviews like
Yeah.
this one, or meet in person. And so being on the ground and having availability and connectivity right away is very key, I think, when it comes to media. A lot of people are using WhatsApp these days as well for media interviews. So
Yeah.
giving a quick call or connecting with press contacts on the ground was great. We also have various organizations that we work with in South America that were helping us to do outreach. So from working with the Foundation for Glaciers in Chile to working with innovative platforms for ocean conservation, or the University of Valparaiso was a great partner as well in
Mhm.
raising awareness. And so we always create a press release about all of the activities that we're planning. So we didn't only plan actually the event on the ship for the Blue Innovation Reception supporting the BBNJ as a conference. We also had 3 days leading up to the ship's arrival. And I think that was also very important to show action on the ground. So we had, for example, on the first day, we organized a interactive tour with artists who had created an mural for the BBNJ. And it was a mural tour. We actually had 3 or 4 murals that were painted around ocean conservation. This was a public art tour, and we took around 30 students and artists through the city of Valparaiso to see the ocean tours and to connect with the ocean through art and education. So that was a really interactive and exciting tour that we created. And that also gained momentum. And there were press who covered the artists who were featured in that tour as Valparaiso being a blue city focused
Right.
on the BBNJ.
Mm.
So also highlighting the city's role and working with the mayor's office and the municipality as well. And they always have their own press team as well. So whenever you work with local city officials, they often will send the press team to capture that official in those moments, collaborating with local NGOs working on sustainable development. So that was one tool. The University of Valparaiso, as I mentioned, was another great partner. We organized for the 3rd year in a row a large beach cleanup in the university's marine protected area. And that
Right.
also gained a lot of publicity because it was the 3rd year as well. Each year we'd been growing and inviting more participants and inviting more students from the university, but also local community members. So we organized the beach cleanup also on a Sunday. So planning a day when families could attend the beach cleanup with students, families, and community members. So trying to also organize events on days when people can really attend and participate. Doesn't always work out perfectly with the schedule of the ship arriving to the ports. So we often have to be a little bit creative, but by organizing the events ahead of time, we were able to select the dates and kind of plan carefully with our partners. So there was a lot of media coverage, not only in press for newspapers, but radio and also a lot of social media. We had about 20 organizations also be part of the beach cleanup. So each organization was then able to put that through their channels and to share and invite people. We had over 100, probably 20 people come to the beach cleanup, which was great.
Mm.
And we also had a sea kayaking day. So we took youth to get to know the marine biodiversity in the Bay of Valparaiso, as that's the city that will be protecting, at least
Right.
within Chile, even if it doesn't become the secretariat officially by the UN, Valparaiso is now working on creating a whole blue movement for the city. So they are working to, you know, constantly protect and raise awareness and educate others. So by bringing youth into the bay and kayaking, we were able to see sea lions up close. There were
Nice.
lots of jellyfish floating on the top of the surface that were beautiful. You often think of jellyfish even getting so close to them as a little bit dangerous, but these are really incredible colored jellyfish that they have in Valparaiso. So each ecosystem is so unique, and by getting closer, getting into the water, getting involved, action. This is the part where I think really that's important. And that helped to also raise awareness. So all of those partner organizations did outreach with us for this BBNJ treaty celebration of 3 to 4 days while Peace Boat arrived in Chile.
I was imagining that you were going to say that your main strategy was engaging with the press, but it sounds like engaging with the public and with your network was almost, if not more, important.
Absolutely. Well, because those networks also have their press contacts, and they have introduced
Mm.
us. I would say the majority of the press contacts that I have in Chile are through our partner organizations.
Okay.
So we do often look up press and try to send, a press release to the contacts in every city based on, what we might find online, contacts
Mm.
that might be listed on websites for those newspaper publications or online articles. But it is much better, definitely, I think, to work with local organizations and have the press that they work with to help put out the message, because it also tends to help, I think, form the message in a way that really represents what you're looking to share.
Mm.
Um, I think having press that understand the issues is also really key and helpful. So that's one of our goals, is to really put out press that is relevant and makes sense, to call for action. That should also be in the press that's released.
Is that your first step coming into a new port then, is to try and engage with networks?
Yes, in every port we have a lot of different networks, in every country. And I'm not working in every country, so I work a
Mm.
lot in Chile because I have a strong connection to the communities there. I studied there when I was in university, so
Yeah.
I think language is also another issue that we're always challenged with. I often would put out a press release in Chile first in Spanish, and then I'm translating it into English for my colleagues to also share with international media. But there's also, a language challenge that you might find where we have, 40 nationalities on board the Peace Boat in various languages that we use. Spanish is always something that's more focused when we're in Latin America or maybe in Europe, going through Spanish-speaking countries.
And in terms of the stories that you're telling the press, it sounded before like it's a lot of individual stories and stories of action as well. Is that true?
Yes, I think stories of action, a little bit in general about Peace Boat as well. There's
Mm.
always something new happening with the ship. For example, this past year, we started a new exhibition on board with the Nobel Peace Center. So, Peace Boat
Mm.
also carries the Nobel Peace Prize on board since 2017 as part of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, ICAN,
Yeah.
which received the Nobel Peace Prize for their advocacy work. And Peace Boat is on the steering committee of ICAN. So, we've been carrying the Nobel Peace Prize on board and also sharing that moment as an advocacy tool to raise awareness for nuclear disarmament, for sustainable development and peace building. And then last year, we started to host the Nobel Peace Center on board, a message to humanity. And this message is the voices of the survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So that's
Yeah.
also a news point.
Yeah. No, I like that you're using voices from Rapa Nui to talk about the ocean and voices from Hiroshima to talk about ICANN. Because to me, that's what we're finding in our work. That's the most impactful way to actually get these stories out there is through those individual voices. But
Absolutely.
in terms of
Testimony sessions. Hmm.
mm, and in terms of this specific campaign, what impact did it have, and how did you measure that?
I think the impact was great this year in Chile. We had a lot of media coverage as well as a lot of participation in the events. Probably reached over 1,000 people as far as participating in all of the events that we organized throughout the time that Peace Boat was there, and with 2,000 people on board learning about the BBNJ. So let's say we reached approximately 3,000 people with education about the conservation efforts of the United Nations, the BBNJ Treaty itself, also related to SDG 14 for life below water and climate action, SDG 13. So also connecting the SDGs with our daily lives. I think that's also an important connection and an advocacy moment that we can take. And then with the impact and the changes it made within Chile, there's quite a lot of momentum. Even in the Chilean government, they just appointed Julio Cordano in charge of the plastics treaty from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He spoke on the Peace Boat as well. So I think just making those connections, making sure that our community understands who they can rely on for specific advocacy roles as well. I think Chile is playing a really strong role right now in the ocean space. And I hope that Peace Boat will continue to be a messenger to bring
Yeah.
the United Nations advocacy of campaigning and treaties to protect the ocean on board the ship, but also being a space where we can create networking and partnership building from stakeholders in the private sector to NGOs, civil society, government, and youth, and indigenous cultures from island nations and other areas to come together and recognize that it's a safe space where they can work on these issues and come to build the next step together.
I think it's wonderful how unique this idea is, and I think that's a huge part of what makes it successful, it sounds like. But is there anything that's more generalized from what you do or what you've experienced that you think can be applied to other instances that aren't boats?
Yes, yeah, we do have a very, special circumstance on having the ship itself as a venue. But I think in any community, you can organize these types of events. It doesn't have to be on the ship. The ship itself provides a neutral space, but in any country, in any community,
Mm.
finding neutral spaces to gather people is important, whether it be, an outdoor area such as a park or recreational area, or a venue that is open to all. And as long as that sustainability and inclusivity and
Yeah.
equality are the basis for bringing people together for these issues. Hopefully, all viewpoints can be respected and understood. And I think all stakeholders are needed to be involved in the SDGs. So there's really no time to waste. We are in 2026 and heading towards 2030 at a fast pace. And so our goal is to use the ship as an advocacy tool, but it doesn't have to be on the ship, right? It can be anywhere. And I think these campaigns and getting media attention as well working with local civil society and governments to bring their voices together. Like you said, sharing testimonies and firsthand experiences are the stories that we should be putting out. So I hope that more media and communicators around the world will pick up these stories and share them, and that we can also improve, the narrative around climate action and sustainability. It shouldn't always be the doom and gloom of what's happening to the environment, which is important, but we also need to see the steps forward to keep the movement alive, to keep people motivated and focused in these times of changes and defunding and, lack of collaboration. We need to foster that collaboration at a faster pace. They always say that peace organizers and media need to be just as strong as those who are conducting war and conflict. So we need to organize, and part of that is the media and how we share that with the public.
I think you've just referenced, it sounds like a lot of the science that we try and pay attention to as well. But to what extent do you personally follow the climate communication science and apply that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Myself, are you asking me me personally, what do I follow? Or how do
Yeah.
we follow together?
Well, I guess a bit of both, really. I mean, how much does climate communication science inform your strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the science is clear and continues to be shared in high level, um, I would say arenas. I don't feel like it's shared as much with the public. We see a lot of promotion right now about coral reefs, that the temperatures are rising in the ocean, that coral reefs are not surviving. They've hit a tipping point. Tips like that get into the media. I think when it's already at the tipping point, it's already getting too late. But I feel like we should intervene with more ocean science and climate science into social media and into the regular media mainstream content.
Mm.
And I think that's also one of the successes, I would say, of the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for
Mm.
Sustainable Development, which started in 2020, goes until 2030. And Peace Boat, with our Youth for SDGs program, we also have been endorsed by IOC UNESCO as a contribution to the UN Ocean Decade. And part of that is putting ocean science at the forefront, learning
Well,
about ocean science.
my question was actually specifically about communication science, so not necessarily about climate itself, but about how we talk about climate.
Exactly. So the ocean literacy aspect, how do we teach that ocean science, is the whole purpose of the Ocean Decade. How do we bring that science to the community? So how do we teach it? How do we talk about it? How do we raise awareness? How do we communicate that in our daily lives? And that's one
Mm.
of the goals, I'd say, that we're trying to embark on currently, is how to really bring the science to the community, how to share that knowledge. So we're doing it as much as we can through our online platforms with our social media, and also on the ship, having guest speakers who come and talk about the issues to the public. With the press, we hope that they pick it up in our communications. But there's a big challenge in the ocean science and climate science world. It's a lot to cover, and it's changing rapidly. So we need the media community on board.
Have you got any advice?
For the media community listening today, advice, I would
Yeah.
say there's a lot to do, so work together. Please collaborate, exchange with your fellow peers in media. I would hope that media is never seen as a competition to get the article out under your name, or to publish that book, or to publish something just for publishing's sake, but work together with other media channels. Work to share your knowledge with others as well, and make sure that you're just presenting the facts, that, fake news is not part of your media stream, that you're presenting real facts with real stories from real people, and that will make a positive impact.
And finally, what do you think is the most important environmental message that the public needs to hear?
I think the most important environmental message today is really to go back to basics, I would say, living
Mm.
in harmony with nature. I kind of touched on this at the beginning, but I think if we can put that message out that we should be living in harmony with nature, that will shift our mindset on how we interact with our environment, thinking about not nature just as a subject, but that we are part of nature. So living in
Yeah.
harmony with nature means living in harmony with ourselves and with the environment that we are part of.
And what's the next thing you're going to do once this is over on your to-do list?
Well, we have a lot coming up for Peace Boat's visit to New York City in June, celebrating the United Nations World Oceans Day. So I'm going to be working on creating that next movement. And after New York City, the ship will be visiting Panama in June. And we are supporting the Panama government in their nature pledge and raising awareness about also the climate action that's been taken in Central and South America. So my next region will be from New York City down to Panama, and we're
Yes.
organizing our youth program from Panama to Guatemala and Mexico. So that's my next endeavor.
Oh, I wish I hadn't asked now. I'm so jealous.
You're welcome on board. We invite the media on board too. Anytime people would like to cover our activities,
I'd love
be
to.
great to have more journalists on board.
Very good. Very good. Well, with that, I'm going to say thank you very much. And this has been the Communicating Earth podcast.